Welcome to the Iron Self podcast, where we jump into health, fitness, mindset, and becoming the best version of yourself. Today with your hosts, Mike and Kayla Minion.
Hey guys, welcome to the Iron Self podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about focus, priorities, and obtaining the outcomes that we want.
So I think to start off, Kayla had planned a little thing that she had learned a little while ago, some Cherokee wisdom.
I found this little Cherokee wisdom when I was taking one of my yoga trainings, and I just absolutely loved it. And I think I've heard it in the past, but not like maybe said in this way. So I'm just going to read it to you because I just think it's awesome. So it's an old Cherokee wisdom folklore. So an old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside of me, he says to the boy. It's a terrible fight, and it's between two wolves. One is evil. He is angry, envious. He has sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and an ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside of you and inside of every person too. The grandson thought for a minute about this and asked his grandfather, "Which wolf will win?" The old Cherokee replied, "The one you feed."
I think that's a really great passage, and it's a great lead into what we're going to be talking about today, because it really does contrast whether, which side of your focus you put your energy into is really where you're going to get your results, right?
Totally. So let's begin today. We're going to talk a little bit about priorities as we're first getting started here. So let's define what are priorities.
So when most people think of priorities, the first thing they're going to think of is, they have a list, a hierarchy in their mind of what is the most important thing to get done throughout their day, throughout their week, their lives. And then it just kind of trickles down from most important to the benign tasks, the least important.
Yeah, we kind of just establish our priorities sometimes throughout the day as they come. We can be a little bit flexible, or maybe we have things scheduled in that take precedent. And that might come with a time frame. It might come based on what we perceive their level of importance to be.
For sure. I guess one thing that I think of when we're thinking about this is where do they really come from? Do your priorities come from, like you said, like a necessity, or is it wants or needs?
I think priorities can come from a lot of different places. What we have prioritized up until this point in our lives has really gotten us to our current state. They've served a purpose to us. So it could be out of necessity, right? We work at a necessity to survive. It could come from a want, you want to be a certain way or have a certain thing, or a need, right? That need where maybe you need to do something like laundry.
I love that the need is laundry. Need to fold laundry. Doing laundry is easy.
So I think that our priorities can really come from a variety of different factors. I don't think that there's one thing that best describes our priorities.
No, that's fair. So when most people come up with these priorities, you got your necessities, your needs, and your wants. What do you think would be the best way to kind of figure out where the top end of your priorities are and where they kind of go from there?
Well, I think that really dividing up your priorities and identifying them becomes really imperative. Now, why is that so important to establish what your priorities are? Is that if we want to, say, achieve a certain goal, or we have a vision for what our life we want it to be, in order to achieve that, we need to understand what our current priorities are and how we're going to maybe adapt those priorities to then step into that goal or step into that vision of what we want in our life. So one task that I'm going to task everybody with today is grabbing a piece of paper, and you're going to draw 2 lines on the paper. So the paper is divided into 3 sections. Section number 1 is going to be daily. Section number 2 is going to be weekly. And section number 3 is going to be monthly. So under daily, I just want you to take an inventory of your day. What do you prioritize most in your day? So what would be something that you would prioritize in your day, Mike?
For me, spending time with my family, spend time with the kids.
Okay. And then, so for myself, something that I might prioritize in my day is food. I love food.
Everybody loves food.
So I do, but I mean, not everybody prioritizes it. Like some people forget to eat it and those kinds of things. But I like to prioritize it. It's really important to me to eat, and so I am constantly thinking of food.
For sure. And then something for like say weekly priority for myself weekly, I like to get in 3 to 4 workouts a week. So that would be definitely high on my priority list.
And a weekly priority for myself. Oh man. Goodness, I feel a little bit stumped right now. But let's go with my weekly priority. I too am like, I need to get at least 3 workouts in a week. My other weekly priority would be like a certain level of cleanliness in the house. You know, when you've got like that standard and you're like, okay, when that standard starts to come down, that priority goes up.
Okay, and then let's think monthly. Monthly priorities for me, I mean, top monthly priority, because we are a family and we have bills to pay, is making sure that we've paid our bills. So power, water, everything stays running for our family. That's, I'd say, number 1 priority for me monthly.
Monthly priority for myself, honestly, is doing a little bit of a recap. Like just, okay, what went well last month? What would I like to see going forward next month? That little bit of a reflection for me is really important. How high it is on my priority list might not be like super high, but it is a priority nonetheless at some point.
But that is also a great lead into what we're going to talk about next is what do you want to prioritize? So now there's when you're making these priorities, and especially if you're going to be making changes to priorities, then we got to talk about the three ways that you can make a change. Is either to add them, to remove them, or to just change what you're doing with them, right? Because if you've set these goals or these priorities so that you can keep moving forward and adding to your life, then you got to figure out how to actually make that work.
So if we take a little bit of a step back and we go back to that daily, weekly, monthly checklist, I mean, to look at what your monthly priorities are, you kind of need to do a little bit of a recap from last month to see what did you prioritize last month. I mean, it was summer, so were you prioritizing that family time a little bit more? And what do you think you might prioritize going into the following month? And then taking a look at that goal and that vision that you have, and then exactly taking a look at, do you add things? Do you remove things? Do you change things? You know, how does that really work?
Well, I know a lot of people when they think of their priorities and they're like, okay, if I say, well, whatever it is, you want to lose 10 pounds, but you don't know where to start with that because you have your list of priorities that you've just made. So now you're thinking, if I want to add something in that's going to help me get towards my goals, does that mean I have to remove something or change something? How does that work? Because you know, you have a 16-hour window. Let's say when you're awake, you sleep for 8 hours magically. Nobody does. But you say you're shooting for that 8 hours of sleep, so you got 16 hours in the day, and let's face it, everybody's plate feels full. So then really, how do we make that happen? Do you have to remove something to add something?
I think that's a really great point and question. Do you need to remove something to add something? I think it depends on what you're adding and what you might be changing. Right? So, I mean, if you remove something, it's simply a removal, right? So, like, maybe one of the things that you remove is that extra time that you're spending watching TV. So maybe you spend 2 hours in the evening watching TV, and you're just going to remove 1 hour of that 2 hours. That's easy enough. But to add something in, say, I think when we were talking about coming up with ideas for this episode, we talked about like, well, if I wanted to add in meditation, because that's been one of my goals lately, and that's been something that I've been struggling with, finding that time or maybe setting forth that time for that meditation. It's like, okay, well, how do I do that? When, like, if I add that into my day, do I find time for that or do I create that?
Well, and I think a lot of that comes back to what you were saying before about taking an inventory of what you're doing already. So inventory your whole day, and let's find out that, you know, at night you're spending, like you said, an hour or 2 hours instead of reading or instead of just going to bed, you're spending that time staying up later. So if you wanted to add something like meditation, and then we have to look at where your priorities are for that. If it's high on that priority list, if you really want to get into that meditative state, maybe you're doing that instead of watching TV at night, or maybe you're turning the TV off earlier so you can get to bed earlier, and then you're waking up earlier to do it first thing in the morning. So it's kind of that give and take, the ebb and flow to make it work.
Right. Yeah. So adding things in, I think you have to really be strategic in how you define what that adding in looks like. Like let's keep with that meditation idea. Like, am I meditating for 5 minutes or am I meditating for half an hour? And I mean, I'm going to be honest, I haven't made time for 5 minutes or a half hour yet, but it is a priority.
but even at that, like you said, if you're just looking to get started, the biggest thing is inaction. Most people make plans forever, but there's no action taken. They want to do this, they want to do that, so they have all these grand plans, but there's no action. So I think the biggest step would be committing and taking that action. So instead of saying, I'm going to do it for a half hour, I would start with the 5 minutes so that you can actually get that ball rolling.
Right. I mean, so you're telling me I probably shouldn't be researching all these 5-minute meditations and then waiting for the perfect one to fall from the ceiling? Oh, man. So, yeah, I think it really depends on what you're adding in, whether or not you have to remove something in order for that. When you change something, so let's use that TV idea. So maybe my priority is that I want to start reading for an hour every night. And I take away that hour from 2 hours of TV to 1 hour of TV and 1 hour reading. Do I prioritize that book? How important is that to me?
Well, and again, that comes back to how high that is on that list, that hierarchy of where your goals are and how high you want to set that on your priority list. If you set reading as a very low priority, you're not going to make the time for it. You'll be watching the TV at an hour and you'll be like, okay, I have the choice to continue watching Big Brother, or I can turn this off and go and read. And if reading really isn't that high of a priority in your mind, in your subconscious, then you're not going to make that change.
I think it also comes back to how important or enjoyable the item is that you're doing. So if you really detest reading, or maybe you really detest exercise, you might not make it as much of a priority. You might, we get stuck in that contemplation stage where it's like, I know it's good for me, I know I should do it, and then we just don't take that action, like you said, in that inaction state is kind of where we stay. So if it becomes something enjoyable, so if you're reading something enjoyable, maybe I might find the same joy out of reading as I'm getting out of watching that TV. But maybe if it's less enjoyable, I might procrastinate. And I don't know if you know anything about me, but I'm a bit of a procrastinator. I like to wait until the very last second. So if it is not life or death, or there is not a timeline associated with it, that last second, that is where I will finally take action.
Honest if nothing else.
So going back to kind of our topic here, so what are the 3 options from your priorities? Do you want to add, remove, or change something, and how does that work? So now that you've got your daily, weekly, and monthly priorities, you got to make that second piece of paper of what would you like your priorities to be. So in the ideal world, what would you like your priorities to be? And then doing that look, that contrast look, okay, these are the priorities I want. This is what I'm currently doing. Now,
how do we make them fit?
How do we make them fit together like a puzzle, right? And do you need to change everything at once?
And again, it's habits are going to stick when you do them small things at a time. Like if you say you want to change the fact that you're not meditating, you're eating like garbage, and you're not working out, and you want to do all 3 of those today, 90% of the population isn't going to be able to do that. It's not sustainable. It's too much change right now.
Well, and if you change more than one thing at a time, so if you change only one thing at a time, the statistic is 80% successful. Yep. Isn't that crazy? So if you only make one small change, it's 80% successful.
How about 2?
30% successful. So if you go down to 2 items that you're changing at once, you become 30% successful.
You drop 50% now.
And because your focus, going back to that focus, which wolf are you feeding? Like, what are you focusing on here? That focus becomes divided, right? I mean, if you've got, like we do often, like a 3-year-old screaming at you and you're trying to do work at the same time, your attention is divided, so you get half the amount of productivity done.
Probably 30%.
Probably 30%. It's probably less than half. So when we're looking at this, there's 2 routes that we can take when we want to change our priorities. So we can do something called looking at the low-hanging fruit. So what is the low-hanging fruit?
Low-hanging fruit's the easy one. If you have 3 items and one of them is super easy, you're like, I can do that tomorrow, then that is your low-hanging fruit. That's you're almost there already, we'll say. That's like if you're working out for a half hour a day and you want to take it up to 45 minutes, it's an extra 15 minutes. You're already there. You're just committing that extra little bit of time.
Right. It'd be like if you're already cooking dinner and you just want to slightly increase your protein intake, you might just up the little bit of chicken that you're having or whatever the protein sources that you're having and up the veggie component, and maybe you take back on the starch, depending on what your goals are, right? But it's just whatever. So low-hanging fruit really means what is the easiest? What is the path of least resistance? And where are you going to find the most success right now? Now that is one option. Now, if you struggle with being successful, that's a really great thing to do because you can just kind of build and you just grab all the low-hanging fruit.
It's the baby steps method, right? You're taking small steps towards your goals. They're going to be small, consistent steps. They're not. You can't discredit this because it's a great method to get moving towards your goals.
Oh, 100%. I would never discredit this. I love low-hanging fruit. But I do, because I can reach up and I can pick it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm pretty short. I can't really reach the high stuff. So the big kahuna. So that would be our next option. What is the big kahuna? That is, what is the biggest thing that you can change right now that would make the most dramatic impact on what you're doing?
The BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. What are we going for?
So what is this big kahuna that we would be going for? So maybe that is you have a weight gain or weight loss goal, and your big kahuna is just simply changing, one aspect of how you're eating, and that's going to totally impact everything. Or maybe your big kahuna is that you only sleep for 4 hours a day, and so if you actually got 6 to 7 hours or more of sleep, you would be more alert, more like you'd have better health. There's all these other factors that would kind of come into play here. So what is that big kahuna or that one big thing that would change?
So I guess the big question, whether you're going to do the low-hanging fruit or the big kahuna, is you need to take a good look at yourself. That's a lot of self-exploration there to know if you have the gusto, the ability to go for those big goals right off the get-go, or if you have to take those smaller steps. And a good way to do that is look at your track record. Look at goals you've had in the past and see whether you were successful going towards them or if you hit a hiccup in the road and you just completely derailed and walked away from the goal.
And I think part of that comes back to identifying your values and how you define yourself. What is your self-talk? What does that look like? So a little bit about when you're defining yourself, like, do you define yourself as a successful person? Do you define yourself as an athletic person? Or is that self-talk maybe less than desirable and you beat yourself up often, or you tell yourself things like, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'm never successful at this, every time I do this I fail, or whatever that could be.
One thing I want to say, and you're in the same boat, you've been personal training for a long time, so when you have a new client, whenever we work with new clients, everybody is their own biggest critic. Everybody is. You are, I am, everybody that you've talked to is their own biggest critic, and that's totally natural to want the best out of yourself. But there's a difference between wanting the best out of everything you do and berating yourself every time that you do not achieve a goal. So that is that self-talk. That is whether if you have a setback, I'm the worst, I can't believe I did this again, or you say, okay, this was a good learning experience. How do I move forward more successfully next time?
Yeah, what is the big change that I can make? So take a look at your current values. What is something that you value? So how do you define yourself? So if I gave you the topic of I'm the kind of person who, how would you finish that sentence? So let's do an example, Mike. Mike is the kind of person who
doesn't let other people affect him.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, and it's important to you that
I am loved and valued by my family.
So that kind of gives you the idea of how he's defining himself and, what he has of a value, right? So I'm going to use my procrastination thing because I already kind of touched on that.
Kayla, so I'm the kind of person who
procrastinates. And it's important to me that I plan and take action.
There's the big one, the taking action. Because, like we said earlier, making a plan is great. Everybody should make plans, goals. But if you don't take that action, you're never going to.
Right. And honestly, a lot of the time for me, planning is prioritizing.
You're
right?
the queen of lists.
I love lists, right? And I have my lists have lists for themselves. But that's, I can define myself as this, and then I try to set my priorities around this. But going back to kind of the original idea here, so we've defined our daily, weekly, and monthly priorities. We've come up with our list of priorities of what we want out of life, and we're picking either one priority that we could add, remove, or change, whether that be low-hanging fruit or the big kahuna. Now, you say to yourself, how do I change this, right? And that integration comes back to, what is that self-talk? How do you define yourself? And what is that one thing that you can do to add, remove, or change that priority?
So this comes back to, like we were saying earlier, that like she said, what is one thing you could do? Well, if you are having a hard time getting your workout in at 6:30 in the morning, maybe it's because you're going to bed at midnight. Maybe it's because you didn't fuel yourself before you went to bed. Maybe you skipped dinner. You got to look not at, okay, well, it's because I didn't wake up. Well, why didn't you wake up? Or same thing for doing your meditation. Okay, well, why? Why didn't we do this at that time? Well, I was too tired. I was distracted. Okay, well, why were you too tired or distracted? You need to take an objective look at all of the surrounding factors and find out really where that change is going to start that'll actually snowball to your successful goal.
And I think that's a really great lead in, is like the big thing that you need to ask yourself is why. And maybe you don't just ask yourself why one time. Maybe you go a little bit further and you take that why a little bit further. It's like, okay, well, why am I a procrastinator? Well, because, I really prioritize all these other things first because I put myself on the back burner and therefore everybody else is more important than me.
So why do you always prioritize everyone else instead of you?
Because you don't always feel valued within yourself, maybe. And that, I know that that's something I'm really, really working on, is that self-value, that self-acceptance, and not looking for that external acceptance. But yeah, I do. I look for that external acceptance. So I'm prioritizing everybody else's needs over my own. So therefore I will procrastinate on my own needs.
So this is the process, though. This is that asking why, but not just doing it once. Maybe you're asking why 2 or 3 times to get to a root here, and then figuring out how you can change that, the one thing, so that you can move forward.
And if you haven't already done so, there is a book called The One Thing. It's by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, and it's an awesome book. And they really do talk about, figuring out what that one thing is. So like Mike said, if you're not getting up for that 6 a.m. workout, and then your one thing is that you're not going to bed maybe early enough. Did you not structure your day or your evening effectively to make sure that you did have that evening routine down so that you could get to bed early enough? Take it back, because if you just remove one domino, the whole domino stack is not going to continue forward. So you kind of have to take the step back and go back to the very beginning of, okay, how do I actually change this? And why is it important to me to change? Because if you don't have that why or that driving force, then you may actually never take the change, and you may never step into that place of action.
You may never take the first step, right? So yeah, and that all, again, it all comes back to where it is on your list of priorities, how high your priority list is set.
So now that we've really discussed priorities and how to establish what your priorities are, what you want them to be, what you might do for add, removing, and changing, finding the skill between finding that why, I think that we've given you guys a ton of work to kind of do today. This isn't like an overnight thing. This is a big piece here.
For sure.
So, make sure you take the opportunity to come back, listen to this episode, do the work if this is something that you feel is important to you, to start changing your priorities and where you're putting that focus. Like the Cherokee said, it's all dependent on which wolf you feed. So which wolf are you going to feed? Which priority are you going to put up at the top of your list? And which priority are you going to begin to take action on?
That's awesome.
If you found value in today's episode, be sure to share this on your social media, share it with a friend, a family member, a loved one. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today.
Have a great day, guys.
Bye for now.